Margaret Simmons stood at her kitchen window, watching the morning light dance across her herb garden. At 72, she had crafted a life that many would envy. A charming cottage 2 blocks from the sea, a calendar filled with meaningful activities, and the freedom to please only herself. The loneliness only crept in during quiet moments like this, when the house echoed with memories of a life once shared. 5 years had passed since Edward's death. 5 years of learning to sleep alone, of cooking for one, of making every decision without the counterbalance of a partner's perspective. She had mastered it all with a grace that made her children proud, but mastery didn't equate to contentment. "You're not moping again, are you?" Her daughter Lily's voice came through the speakerphone on the counter. Margaret smiled, turning from the window. "Just thinking. There's a difference." "Well, think while you water those tomato plants. You said they were looking peaked yesterday." "I'm perfectly capable of remembering my own gardening schedule," Margaret replied, though she glanced guiltily at the slightly wilted plants on her patio. "Of course you are. Just like you're perfectly capable of joining that senior centre I've been telling you about." Margaret sighed. Lily, ever practical, had been gently pushing her toward more social activities since her retirement from the library 2 years ago. Her son Michael took a different approach, calling every Sunday like clockwork but never pressuring, just listening. "Actually," Margaret said, filling her watering can at the sink, "I'm thinking of trying their Wednesday dance class." The surprised silence on the other end made her smile. "Really? That's wonderful, Mom." "Don't sound so shocked. I used to be quite good on a dance floor, you know. Your father couldn't keep up." After the call ended, Margaret stood before her closet, fingers trailing over fabrics she rarely wore anymore. She selected a blue dress that brought out her eyes, applied lipstick for the first time in weeks, and drove to the Palm Harbor Community Center. The dance class was already underway when she arrived, a mix of couples and singles moving to a waltz. She hesitated in the doorway, suddenly feeling every one of her 72 years. Just as she considered retreating, a tall figure appeared at her side. "They're intimidating, aren't they?" The man's voice was warm, slightly rough with age, but pleasant. All those people who remember the steps. Margaret turned to find kind brown eyes regarding her with amusement. He was older than her by perhaps 6 or 7 years, with a full head of silver hair and the straight posture of someone who'd spent a lifetime standing tall. "I remember the steps," she replied. "It's having the courage to join in that I'm lacking." He offered his hand. "Harold Whittaker. And I'd be honored to help you find that courage if you'd allow me." His palm was warm and dry against hers. "Margaret Simmons. And I'm not making any promises about my footwork." They joined the circle, and Margaret discovered that her body remembered what her mind had forgotten. Harold was a capable partner, guiding her with gentle pressure and apologizing with self-deprecating humor when he occasionally lost the rhythm. "I'm afraid I'm not as sharp as I once was," he confessed during a break. "Some days are better than others." "We're all entitled to our off days," Margaret replied, finding herself drawn to the wistful quality in his smile. By the time the class ended, they had fallen into an easy conversation that continued over coffee at the center's cafe. Harold told her he'd been an investment advisor before retirement, traveling often but always returning to the coast he loved. He spoke eloquently about music, architecture, and the changing shoreline, though Margaret noticed he sometimes searched for words or repeated himself. "Would you mind if I called you sometime?" he asked as they prepared to leave. "I've enjoyed our conversation more than I can say." Margaret felt a flutter she hadn't experienced in decades. "I'd like that very much." Their first proper date was a walk along the coastal path, where Harold pointed out various seabirds with surprising expertise. Their second was lunch at a small bistro where he knew the owner by name. Each time, Margaret found herself more charmed by his old-world manners and quiet intelligence. She also noticed the lapses, moments when he would stop mid-sentence, confused, before finding his way back to his thought. Once he called her Amanda, before immediately correcting himself with evident embarrassment. Rather than concerning her, these moments only endeared him to her more. There was a vulnerability beneath his dignified exterior that resonated with her own carefully concealed fears of aging. On their fifth date, Harold invited her to his home, a stunning craftsman house overlooking the bay. He prepared a simple but elegant dinner, though he seemed momentarily flustered when she asked where he kept his wine glasses. "I don't entertain much anymore," he admitted. "Not since—" He paused, a shadow crossing his face. "It's been a long time." "Were you married before?" Margaret asked gently. Harold stared out the window for a long moment. "Yes," he finally said. "She's been gone a long time." He didn't elaborate, and Margaret didn't press. As autumn turned to winter, they fell into a comfortable routine. Sundays at the farmer's market, Wednesday dance classes, and quiet evenings sharing books and music. Harold was unfailingly considerate, though his forgetfulness seemed to increase. He began keeping a small notebook to jot reminders, and Margaret pretended not to notice when he consulted it before their dates. In January, Margaret invited Harold to dinner to meet her children. Lily arrived with a barely concealed look of evaluation, while Michael was warmly welcoming from the start. "So, Harold," Lily began after dinner, "Mom tells us you were in investments. Which firm?" "Barclay Steinem," he answered promptly. 32 years. I specialized in long-term growth portfolios for clients approaching retirement." He smiled, "though that seems a lifetime ago now." Michael asked about Harold's travels, and soon they were all engaged in a lively discussion about European architecture. Margaret watched with growing warmth as Harold charmed her children with stories and thoughtful questions about their own lives. Later, as she walked him to his car, Harold took both her hands in his. "Your children are wonderful," he said. "You've done a magnificent job with them." "They liked you," Margaret replied. "Even Lily, though she'd never admit it so quickly." Harold chuckled, then grew serious. "Margaret, these past months have been—" He paused, seeming to search for adequate words. "I never expected to feel this way again. At our age, it seems almost miraculous." "Yes," she agreed softly. "It does." As spring arrived, Harold's cognitive lapses became more pronounced. He would sometimes arrive at her house looking confused, having forgotten they had plans. Once, she found him sitting in his car in her driveway, unable to remember why he'd come. Yet between these episodes were days of perfect clarity when his wit and warmth shone through undiminished. Margaret found herself taking on a subtle caretaking role, reminding him of appointments, gently reorienting him when he became confused, making sure he took the medications he sometimes forgot. She researched memory disorders, suspecting early dementia but hesitant to voice her concerns. On a perfect April evening, Harold took her to the beach where they'd first walked together. He'd been especially sharp that day, reminiscing about their early dates with perfect recall. As the sun began to set, he led her to a driftwood bench overlooking the waves. "I have something to ask you," he said, his voice steady but his hands trembling slightly as he reached into his pocket. Margaret felt her heart quicken as he withdrew a small velvet box. "I know this may seem foolish at our age," he began. "We've both had our lives, our families, our accomplishments. But I've discovered that the heart doesn't recognize time the way the mind does." He opened the box to reveal a delicate silver ring set with a single pearl. "Margaret Simmons, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Tears blurred her vision as she looked from the ring to his hopeful face. "Are you certain?" she asked. "With everything, with your memory." He took her hand firmly in his. "I am having some difficulties," he acknowledged. "I'm not a fool, Margaret. I know something isn't right. But I also know, with absolute certainty, that I love you. On my clear days and my confused days, I love you." Margaret touched his cheek gently. "Then yes, I will marry you." The wedding was planned for early June, a small ceremony in Margaret's garden with only close friends and family. Lily threw herself into the arrangements with surprising enthusiasm, while Michael helped Harold organize his affairs. The night before the wedding, they held a small dinner for their immediate family. Harold seemed distracted, occasionally looking around the room as if searching for someone. "Is everything all right?" Margaret asked quietly as they cleared the dessert plates. "Yes, of course," he replied, though his smile seemed strained. "Just thinking about tomorrow." He paused, his brow furrowing. "Amelia would have—" He stopped abruptly, shaking his head. "I'm sorry. I meant to say how happy I am." Margaret felt a chill at the unfamiliar name, but attributed it to his confusion. "It's all right," she assured him. "You should rest. Tomorrow's a big day." The morning of the wedding dawned clear and warm. Margaret's garden was transformed with white chairs and floral arrangements. In her bedroom, she smoothed the cream-colored dress she'd chosen, elegant and age-appropriate, but still making her feel beautiful. Lily had just finished arranging baby's breath in Margaret's silver hair when the doorbell rang. "That's odd," Lily said, checking her watch. "No one should be here for another half hour." "Would you mind seeing who it is?" Margaret asked, adjusting her pearl earrings, a gift from Harold to match her engagement ring. Lily returned moments later, her face pale. "Mum, there's a woman here asking for you. And for Harold." Margaret felt a premonition of change as she made her way to the front door. Standing on her porch was an elegant woman approximately her own age, her silver hair swept into a neat chignon, her posture erect despite the evident fatigue in her eyes. "Mrs. Simmons?" the woman asked. "I'm Amelia Whittaker, Harold's wife." The words hung in the air between them, impossible yet spoken with such calm certainty that Margaret couldn't immediately dismiss them. "I'm sorry," she finally managed. "There must be some mistake." Amelia's expression remained composed, though her eyes held a mixture of sympathy and determination. "May I come in?" "This isn't a conversation for your doorstep." Margaret stepped back mechanically, allowing the woman to enter. Lily appeared in the hallway, her face a mask of concern. "Mom? Lily, please call your brother. Ask him to come right away." Margaret led Amelia to the living room, her mind racing. "I don't know what you think is happening here, but Harold Whittaker is my fiancé. We're to be married in—" She glanced at the clock. "Less than 30 minutes. Amelia opened her handbag and removed a leather wallet. From it, she extracted several photographs, which she laid carefully on the coffee table. "This is our wedding day, 46 years ago," she said, indicating a yellowed photo of a young Harold in a dark suit, his arm around a pretty brunette. "This is our son Derek's college graduation." Another photo, Harold looking proud beside a young man in cap and gown. "And this," she continued, removing a small velvet box, "is my wedding ring, which I removed when Harold could no longer remember who I was and became agitated by my presence." Margaret stared at the gold band, identical in style to the men's ring Harold wore, which he'd explained was his father's. With trembling fingers, she picked up the college graduation photo. The resemblance between Harold and the young man was subtle but unmistakable, something in the set of the jaw, the shape of the eyes. "This can't be," she whispered. The sound of footsteps in the hallway drew her attention. Harold appeared in the doorway, handsome in his wedding suit, his expression brightening at the sight of Margaret. Then his gaze shifted to Amelia, and his face transformed with confusion. "My dear," he said, his voice uncertain, "what are you doing here?" Margaret felt the room tilt slightly. "Harold, do you know this woman?" He looked between them, distress evident in his features. Of course. That's ... He stopped, pressing his fingers to his temples. "I'm sorry, I'm having one of my moments." Amelia stood, moving toward him with practiced care. "It's all right, Harold. It's Amelia, your wife." Harold stared at her, his expression cycling through confusion, recognition, and distress. "Amelia," he repeated, then with sudden clarity. "But where have you been?" "I've been so worried." The words struck Margaret like physical blows. She sank onto the sofa, still clutching the photograph. The front door opened and Michael's voice called out, "Mom!" Lily said it was urgent. He stopped in the doorway, taking in the tableau before him. "What's going on?" Amelia turned to him with the same composed demeanour. "I'm Amelia Whittaker. Harold is my husband of 46 years. He has vascular dementia with moderate cognitive impairment. 3 months ago, he wandered away from our home while I was at a doctor's appointment. By the time I realised he was missing, he had disappeared. I've been searching for him ever since." Michael, ever the rational doctor, moved immediately to verification mode. "Do you have identification? Medical records?" Amelia produced her driver's license, insurance cards listing Harold as her spouse, and a thick folder of medical documents detailing Harold's condition. "He was diagnosed 3 years ago," she explained as Michael examined the papers. "At first, it was manageable. Short-term memory lapses, occasional confusion. But it progressed more rapidly than we expected. He began to wander, to forget who I was sometimes." Margaret watched Harold, who had taken a seat in the armchair, his expression increasingly distressed as he listened. "If he's been missing for months, why didn't you report it to the police?" Lily demanded, having joined them in the living room. "I did," Amelia replied. "But Harold has had episodes before where he's gone to old familiar places. His former office, our previous home. He always turned up within a day or two. The police classified him as a voluntary missing person after speaking with his doctor. They suggested he might have sought out somewhere that felt safe to him." Michael looked up from the medical records. "These appear legitimate, and they match what we've observed of Harold's symptoms." Lily moved to Margaret's side, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. "How did you find him here?" "Pure chance," Amelia admitted. "A friend saw him at the farmer's market last weekend and called me. I flew in yesterday and confirmed it was indeed Harold before approaching you." She turned to Margaret with genuine sympathy. "I'm truly sorry. I can see you care for him." Margaret found her voice at last. "He told me he was a widower." Amelia nodded sadly. "That's part of his confabulation, creating false memories to fill gaps. Sometimes he believes I've died. Other times, he doesn't recognize me at all." Harold stood suddenly, his face flushed with agitation. "Stop talking about me as if I'm not here. I know who I am. I know who—" He faltered, looking around the room wildly. "This is my wedding day. Margaret and I are getting married." Amelia approached him slowly. "Harold, dear, you're confused. We've been married for many years. Remember our house on Maple Street? The blue shutters you insisted on painting yourself? Remember Derek's treehouse that you built when he was 7? Something flickered in Harold's eyes. Recognition. Memory. Then panic. No, that's not right. I'm here for my wedding. Margaret." He turned to her, pleading. Margaret rose on unsteady legs. "I'm here, Harold. Tell them they're mistaken. Tell them about us, about the dancing, about the pearl ring." His voice broke on the last words. Margaret felt tears spill down her cheeks. "The ring is real," she said softly. "What we feel is real. But Harold, I think you may already be married." The doorbell rang again, a cheerful sound grotesquely at odds with the moment. Lily went to answer it, returning with an apologetic expression. "It's Reverend Matthews, and the Hendersons and Clarks have arrived too." "Tell them there's been a family emergency," Michael said firmly. "The wedding is postponed." While Michael handled the arriving guests, Margaret led Harold to the kitchen, away from Amelia's watchful gaze. His hands trembled as she held them in hers. "Harold, I need you to focus," she said gently. "Do you recognize that woman? Is she familiar to you at all?" He stared at her, his expression lost. Sometimes I see faces that seem like they should be familiar. I hear names that sound like echoes." His eyes cleared briefly. "I know that I love you, Margaret. That feels real and solid when so many things don't." She brushed away fresh tears. "I believe you, but we need to understand what's happening. Michael is calling the nursing home where you lived before we met. We'll figure this out. When they returned to the living room, Michael was on the phone, his expression grave as he made notes. Amelia sat primly on the edge of the sofa, her handbag on her lap, looking simultaneously out of place and completely self-possessed. "Yes, I understand," Michael was saying. "And when was he discharged?" "I see. No, that's very helpful. Thank you." He ended the call and turned to them. That was Sunny Pines Care Centre. They confirmed that Harold Whittaker was a resident there until approximately 4 months ago, when he left the facility without formal discharge. They've been in contact with Mrs. Whittaker about his disappearance. Margaret felt the last of her hopes crumble. So it's true. "It appears so," Michael said gently. "Mrs. Whittaker, perhaps you could explain why Harold was in a care facility rather than at home." Amelia's composed facade cracked slightly, revealing exhaustion beneath. "After the diagnosis, I cared for him at home for nearly 2 years. But as his condition worsened, so did the demands. He needed constant supervision. He would wake at night, confused and sometimes combative. Her voice faltered for the first time. "I developed severe depression. My doctor said I was experiencing caregiver burnout and suggested I place Harold in a facility temporarily while I recovered." She looked at Harold with evident affection. "It was the hardest decision I've ever made. Our son Derek supported it. He has his own family, young children. He couldn't provide the care Harold needed either." "You have a son?" Margaret asked Harold softly. Harold's brow furrowed. "Derek," he said, the name clearly familiar on his tongue. "He built a model airplane once. I helped him paint it blue." Amelia smiled sadly. "Red? It was red, Harold. You always mix that up to create more confusion." Lily, who had been quietly observing, asked, "If you placed him there for temporary care, why did it take so long to find him after he wandered off?" "I was hospitalized myself when it happened," Amelia explained. "A cardiac event, stress-related, my doctors said. By the time I was stable enough to be informed, Harold had been missing for over a week. The facility had followed protocol, but—" She spread her hands helplessly. Margaret watched Harold, who was now staring out the window, seemingly disconnected from the conversation about him. His fingers worried at his wedding band, not his father's, she now understood, but his own. "What happens now?" she asked, the question directed at no one in particular. Amelia straightened her shoulders. "I've recovered my health. Our home is prepared for Harold's return. I've arranged for in-home care assistance this—" She hesitated, then added gently, "I'd like to take my husband home, Mrs. Simmons. We have grandchildren who miss him. A life built over nearly 5 decades. Michael placed a hand on Margaret's shoulder. "Mum, I think we need to consider what's best for Harold here." Margaret nodded numbly. "May I have a moment alone with him?" "Before you take him." Amelia hesitated, then nodded. "Of course." Margaret led Harold to the garden, now set up for a wedding that would never take place. White chairs in neat rows, flowers perfuming the air, sunshine streaming through the arbour where they were to have exchanged vows. "It's beautiful," Harold said, looking around with appreciation. "Is there an event today?" Margaret's heart broke a little more. "Harold, do you know who I am?" He turned to her, his eyes clearing momentarily. "Margaret," he said firmly. "My Margaret, the one who dances with me on Wednesdays." She took his hands, those elegant hands that had held hers so carefully these past months. "That's right. We've been very happy together, haven't we?" "The happiest," he agreed, squeezing her fingers. "I don't want to leave you." "I don't want you to go either," she admitted. "But there's a woman inside who says she's your wife, that you have a family, a son, grandchildren. Do you remember them?" Harold's expression clouded. "Sometimes I see a boy with a red airplane and a woman making pancakes on Sunday mornings." He closed his eyes. "But then I see you in your blue dress and that feels more real somehow." Margaret fought back tears. I think you need to go with Amelia for now. She can care for you, get you the help you need. Will I see you again? He asked, his voice suddenly small, like a child's. I don't know, she answered honestly. I hope so. She led him back inside where Amelia was waiting with his medication bag that Margaret had kept in her bathroom cabinet. Michael had already transferred Harold's overnight things to Amelia's rental car. Take good care of him, Margaret said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. He likes classical music in the evenings, Beethoven especially, and he sometimes forgets to eat unless reminded. Amelia nodded, a flash of understanding passing between the women. I know, but thank you for caring for him while he was lost. She hesitated, then added, he seems happier than when he left. Calmer. You've been good for him. As Harold and Amelia prepared to leave, he turned back to Margaret with sudden clarity in his eyes. The pearl ring, he said. It's yours. Keep it. Then he was gone, leaving Margaret standing in her wedding dress in a house full of flowers, surrounded by the remnants of a future that had evaporated like morning mist. 3 weeks after what should have been her wedding day, Margaret stood in her garden, methodically deadheading roses that had bloomed and faded. Like her brief happiness with Harold, she thought. Beautiful, but fleeting. The first week after his departure had been a fog of grief and disbelief. Her children had stayed with her, cancelling their own obligations to form a protective circle around her. Friends brought casseroles and sympathy, treating her like a widow though Harold lived on across town with his actual wife. By the second week, Margaret had insisted on returning to her normal routine, volunteering at the library on Tuesdays, garden club on Thursdays. She avoided the community centre on Wednesdays, unable to face the dance class where she and Harold had met. Now, in the third week, anger had begun to seep in alongside the sadness. Not at Harold. His confusion wasn't his fault, but at the situation, at fate's cruel joke in bringing them together only to tear them apart. And, increasingly, at small inconsistencies in Amelia's story that nagged at her mind. The doorbell rang, pulling her from her thoughts. She removed her gardening gloves, brushed soil from her pants, and went to answer it, expecting another well-meaning friend with a casserole. Instead, she found Michael on her doorstep, his expression uncharacteristically intense. Mum, I need to show you something, he said without preamble, holding up a small plastic bag. Hello to you too, she replied, stepping back to let him in. What's got you so worked up? Michael followed her to the kitchen, where he emptied the bag onto the counter. Out fell Harold's watch, the vintage Omega he'd always worn but had apparently left behind. I found this when I was packing up the last of his things from the guest room, Michael explained. Look at the back. Margaret picked up the watch, turning it over to find the case back was actually a locket. She'd never noticed it before, had never seen Harold remove the watch. With careful fingers, she opened the tiny hinge to reveal a miniature photo tucked inside. A young Harold with his arm around a pretty dark-haired woman. Not Amelia. That's not all, Michael continued, pulling out his phone. Remember how Amelia mentioned Derek built a model airplane with Harold? And Harold said it was blue, but Amelia corrected him, saying it was red. Margaret nodded, the moment vivid in her memory. Well, that got me thinking about other inconsistencies. Harold told me once he was an only child, raised by his grandmother after his parents died young. But when Amelia was describing their life together, she mentioned visiting Harold's sister in Vermont every Christmas. Margaret sat down heavily. I noticed that too. I thought perhaps it was just Harold's confusion, or mine given the circumstances. That's what I assumed as well, but something didn't sit right. Michael pulled up a document on his phone. So I did some digging. This is Harold's profile from his investment firm's archived website. It mentions he was raised by his grandmother in Portsmouth after being orphaned at age 8. No siblings. A flicker of hope ignited in Margaret's chest. What are you saying? I don't know yet, Michael admitted. But there are enough inconsistencies to make me wonder if Amelia's story is entirely true. The next day, Lily joined their investigation, bringing her paralegal skills and access to public records. They gathered around Margaret's dining table, laptops open and notes scattered across the surface. "Let's start with property records," Lily suggested, fingers flying over her keyboard. "Harold's house on Harbourview Drive. When did he purchase it? And is it solely in his name?" After several minutes of searching, she looked up with a frown. According to county records, Harold purchased that house 22 years ago. It was solely in his name until 6 months ago, when ownership was transferred to a Derek Whittaker. 6 months ago, Margaret repeated. That's well after Harold's diagnosis, when he was already experiencing significant confusion. Michael leaned forward. And just before he supposedly wandered away from the nursing home. Lily continued searching, pulling up deed transfers, tax records, and local news archives. A picture began to emerge. Harold had indeed been a successful investment advisor, more successful than he had let on to Margaret. He had quietly accumulated significant wealth, including real estate holdings beyond his primary residence. "Look at this," Michael said, turning his laptop toward them. A feature in the financial section of the Tribune from 15 years ago. Local investment guru shares tips for retirement planning. There's a photo of Harold receiving an award. The accompanying article painted Harold as something of a financial wunderkind, known for his conservative but remarkably successful investment strategies that had helped numerous clients secure comfortable retirements. "He never mentioned this to me," Margaret said softly. "He was so modest about his career." "There's more," Lily interjected. "I found Harold's medical records, or at least the ones filed with the county for his competency evaluation. Look at the dates." The records showed Harold had indeed been diagnosed with vascular dementia, but the official evaluation establishing his diminished capacity had been filed just 7 months ago, suspiciously close to when his house had been transferred to Derek. "And look who requested the competency hearing," Lily pointed to a name on the document. "Derek Whittaker, son and concerned party." Margaret sat back, processing this information. So Harold was diagnosed, and shortly afterward, his son had him declared legally incompetent and transferred his house into his own name. "It gets more interesting," Michael said grimly. "I've been looking into Sunny Pines Care Centre. It's not the kind of high-end facility you'd expect someone of Harold's means to be placed in. It's basic Medicare-approved care, nothing more." "But if Harold had money," Margaret began. "Exactly," Lily finished. "Why put him in a bare minimum facility unless someone was trying to conserve his assets for other purposes?" Margaret thought back to her time with Harold. He had always been generous, insisting on paying for meals, buying thoughtful gifts, never seeming concerned about money. Yet, he lived simply in his beautiful but modest home, drove a 10-year-old car, and wore the same few sweaters in rotation. "I think," she said slowly, "we need to find out more about Derek Whittaker." Lily was already on it, cross-referencing public records. Derek Whittaker, age 51, married to Jennifer Whittaker, 3 children, works as a real estate developer in Fairfield County. She scrolled further. Interesting. His company, Whittaker Development, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection 18 months ago. Financial troubles, Michael mused, and suddenly his father's assets start changing hands. Margaret stood abruptly. "There's something else we should check. Harold kept a study in his house, filing cabinets full of financial records. He showed me once when he was looking for concert tickets we'd misplaced. If Derek has been liquidating Harold's assets, there might be evidence there." "Mum, we can't just break into Harold's house," Lily protested. "It's not breaking in if I still have the key," Margaret replied, moving to the decorative box on her sideboard where she kept spare keys. "Harold gave me one in case of emergencies." She held up a silver key with a blue rubber identifier. "And I'd say this qualifies." Despite her children's concerns, Margaret insisted on visiting Harold's house the following day. They agreed to accompany her, making the trip mid-morning when Derek would likely be at work and Amelia might be running errands. The house looked different somehow. The carefully tended garden beds showing signs of neglect, blinds drawn against the morning light that Harold had always welcomed in. Margaret's hand trembled slightly as she inserted the key into the lock. The interior was changed as well. Harold's collection of jazz records was missing from the built-in shelves, as was the antique chess set that had belonged to his grandfather. The furniture remained, but personal touches, photographs, books, the hand-thrown pottery he'd collected during his travels, were noticeably absent. "They're clearing it out," Lily whispered, though the house was empty. Margaret moved purposefully toward Harold's study at the back of the house. The room had been transformed, filing cabinets gone, desk cleared of papers, bookshelves emptied of the financial texts and history volumes Harold had treasured. "They've removed everything," she said, dismay evident in her voice. Michael was examining the desk drawers. "Not everything," he said, pulling out a false bottom to reveal a hidden compartment. "Harold showed me this once when I admired the craftsmanship of the desk, said it was where he kept his most important papers." Inside was a slim leather portfolio containing documents protected in plastic sleeves, Harold's birth certificate, military service record, and several legal documents. Among them was a marriage certificate dated 43 years earlier, uniting Harold Whittaker and Amanda Elizabeth Prescott. "Amanda?" Margaret breathed. "Not Amelia. He called me Amanda once, remember? I thought he was just confused." Further documents revealed the full story. Amanda had died of cancer 12 years ago. There was a copy of her death certificate, obituary, and funeral program. The marriage had produced no children, but Harold had legally adopted Amanda's son from a previous relationship, Derek Prescott, now Derek Whittaker. "So, Amelia isn't his wife," Lily said, scanning the documents. "But who is she?" The answer came in the form of a letter tucked into the portfolio, dated just over 3 years ago. It was from Harold to his attorney, documenting his recent diagnosis and outlining his wishes for his care and estate. "I have been blessed with financial success beyond what a Portsmouth orphan could have dreamed," Harold had written. "While my adopted son Derek will inherit the bulk of my estate, I have arranged for specific provisions for my longtime housekeeper, Amelia Santos, who has cared for our home since Amanda's illness. The attached trust will provide for her comfortable retirement when my condition necessitates more specialized care than she can provide." Margaret sat heavily in Harold's desk chair, the pieces falling into place. Amelia was his housekeeper. She must have known about his condition, his assets, everything. "And when Derek ran into financial trouble," Michael continued, "they concocted this plan together. Have Harold declared incompetent, transfer his assets, and if anyone questions it. They have a convenient story about a confused old man with dementia who doesn't know what he's saying," Lily finished grimly. Margaret felt anger rising within her, not just at the deception, but at the exploitation of Harold's vulnerability. "We need to get him out of there. If they're willing to go this far for his money, who knows how they're treating him?" They carefully replaced the documents, leaving no trace of their visit, and returned to Margaret's house to formulate a plan. Michael contacted a colleague specializing in elder law, while Lily began documenting their findings for potential legal action. "The timing is suspicious," Lily said, organizing their evidence into a coherent timeline. Harold's diagnosis, then Derek's business troubles, then the competency hearing, the property transfer, and finally this elaborate charade with Amelia posing as his wife. "What I don't understand is how they expected to get away with it," Michael said. "Surely there are people who knew Harold and his real wife, Amanda." Harold mentioned he and Amanda were private people, Margaret recalled. They travelled frequently but entertained rarely. And after her death, he said he withdrew from most social circles. "The perfect target," Lily muttered. "An isolated elderly man with significant assets and a diagnosis that makes his testimony unreliable." Margaret studied the photo from Harold's watch locket. Harold and Amanda, young and in love. "We need to prove Amelia isn't who she claims to be, and we need to establish that Harold was being manipulated when his assets were transferred." Michael's attorney friend arrived that evening, a sharp-eyed woman named Eleanor Jeffries who specialized in cases of elder financial abuse. She reviewed their evidence with methodical precision. "You've done good preliminary work," she acknowledged, "but we need more to build a solid case. Bank records showing unusual activity, witnesses who can confirm Harold's relationship with Amelia was professional rather than marital, and ideally, a current assessment of Harold's mental state by an independent physician." "I can arrange the medical evaluation," Michael offered. "I have colleagues at Memorial who specialize in geriatric neurology." "And I can keep digging into the financial records," Lily added. "If Derek has been liquidating assets, there must be a paper trail." Eleanor turned to Margaret. "Mrs. Simmons, you may have the most difficult task. We need to know Harold's current condition and whether he's being properly cared for. Is there any way you could see him without arousing suspicion?" Margaret thought for a moment. "I could claim I found some of his belongings that were left behind. Personal items that would seem important enough to warrant returning in person." "Be careful," Eleanor warned. "If they suspect you're investigating them, they might move Harold or restrict access to him entirely." The next day, Margaret stood on the doorstep of what had once been Harold's house, heart pounding beneath her carefully casual outfit. She carried a small box containing Harold's watch, a book of poetry they'd read together, and several photographs taken during their relationship. Amelia answered the door, her composure faltering momentarily at the sight of Margaret. "Mrs. Simmons," she said, quickly recovering, "this is unexpected." "I found some of Harold's things," Margaret explained, her voice steady despite her churning emotions. "Items with sentimental value that I thought he should have." Amelia hesitated, then stepped back. "How thoughtful. Please come in. Harold is having one of his better days." The house felt different from their visit the previous day, hastily arranged to appear more lived in, with family photos now displayed on surfaces that had been bare. Margaret recognized Derek from the documents they'd found, pictured with a blonde woman and 3 teenagers. Harold sat in the sunroom, gazing out at the neglected garden. He looked thinner than when she'd last seen him, his clothes hanging loosely on his frame, his silver hair uncombed. Something in Margaret's chest tightened painfully. "Harold," Amelia said loudly, as if speaking to someone hard of hearing. "Look who's come to visit. Do you remember Margaret?" Harold turned slowly, his eyes focusing on Margaret with effort. For a terrible moment she thought he wouldn't recognize her. Then his face transformed with a smile of such genuine joy that tears sprang to her eyes. "Margaret," he said, his voice stronger than she expected, "you came back." "I brought some of your things," she said, moving to sit beside him while Amelia watched from the doorway. "How kind of you," Amelia interjected before Harold could respond. "Harold has been asking about his watch. Haven't you, dear?" Harold looked confused. "Have I?" Margaret opened the box, removing the watch first. "I thought you might miss this," she said, watching his face carefully as she handed it to him. Harold took it reverently, turning it over in his hands with recognition. His thumb moved automatically to the latch on the back, opening the locket to reveal the photo inside. He stared at it for a long moment. "Amanda," he whispered, then looked up at Margaret with sudden clarity. "Not Amelia. Amanda." Amelia stepped forward quickly. "Harold gets confused about names," she explained, reaching for the watch. "I'll put this away safely." Harold clutched the watch tighter. "No," he said firmly. "It's mine." An awkward silence fell, broken by the sound of the front door opening. "Mom? Where are you?" a male voice called. "In the sunroom, Derek," Amelia replied, her eyes never leaving the watch in Harold's hand. Derek Whittaker appeared in the doorway, a stocky man in his early 50s with thinning hair and Harold's jawline. He stopped short at the sight of Margaret. "What's she doing here?" he demanded, not bothering with pleasantries. "Mrs. Simmons was just returning some of your father's belongings," Amelia explained smoothly. "How thoughtful of her to stop by." Derek's expression remained suspicious. "Dad's had enough excitement for today. He needs his rest." Margaret rose slowly, reluctant to leave Harold but aware that antagonizing Derek would accomplish nothing. "Of course," I didn't mean to tire him out. She turned to Harold, who was still clutching the watch. I'm glad I could return this to you. Will you come again? Harold asked, an urgency in his voice that broke her heart. Before she could answer, Derek stepped between them. Dad needs to focus on his recovery without confusion from outside visitors. I'm sure Mrs. Simmons understands that. Margaret met Harold's eyes over Derek's shoulder. I understand completely, she said, infusing the words with meaning she hoped Harold would grasp. I'll be thinking of you. As Amelia showed her out, Margaret took careful note of the house's condition. The half-empty rooms, the prescription bottles on the kitchen counter, the business cards from an estate sale company, magnetized to the refrigerator. Every detail might prove important. He's not well, Amelia said quietly at the door, her act of the concerned wife still in place. The excitement of seeing you has probably set his recovery back. What treatment is he receiving? Margaret asked, unable to keep a slight edge from her voice. The best care possible, Amelia replied smoothly. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to give Harold his medication. The visit had confirmed her worst fears. Harold was being kept isolated, likely over-medicated, while his assets were systematically liquidated around him. She returned to her car, pulled out her phone, and called Michael. We need to move quickly, she said without preamble. Harold recognized me, and the watch. He said Amanda, not Amelia. He knows something isn't right. Did you see any signs of physical neglect or abuse? Michael asked, his physician's training evident in the question. No obvious bruising or injuries, but he's lost weight, seemed lethargic. There were several prescription bottles in the kitchen. I couldn't read the labels. I'll expedite the medical evaluation order, Michael promised. Eleanor thinks we have enough for a preliminary protective order, but the judge might want more evidence before removing Harold from their care. He doesn't have time for us to build a perfect case, Margaret insisted. Every day he's there is another day they can manipulate and exploit him. I understand, Mom. We're moving as fast as we can. Lily's found something in the banking records. Large cash withdrawals from Harold's accounts beginning just after the house transfer. And she's located Amelia's sister in Oakland, who confirmed she was Harold's housekeeper, not his wife. Margaret felt a surge of hope. That should be enough to prove they're lying about their relationship to Harold. Eleanor is preparing the emergency filing now. She thinks we can get a hearing as early as tomorrow morning. But, Mom... Michael hesitated. You should prepare yourself. Even if we succeed in removing Harold from their care, his condition is real. He'll still need significant support. I know, Margaret said softly. I've never forgotten that. I just want him safe, treated with dignity, and protected from those who would exploit him. The hearing was scheduled for 10 o'clock the following morning, a closed proceeding before Judge Martha Reinhardt, known for her expertise in elder law cases. Margaret dressed carefully in a conservative navy suit, her silver hair neatly arranged, determined to project competence and stability. Eleanor met them at the courthouse, accompanied by a distinguished neurologist who had reviewed Harold's medical records and was prepared to testify about the suspicious timing of his competency evaluation. Derek and Amelia have been served notice of the hearing, Eleanor informed them, but they may choose not to appear and send their attorney instead. Will Harold be here? Margaret asked. I requested his presence, but it will depend on whether the court approved transportation arrangements in time. His testimony, while potentially inconsistent due to his condition, could be compelling. They entered the small hearing room to find Derek already seated at the respondent's table, deep in conversation with a sharp-featured attorney. Amelia sat beside them, her expression a mask of injured dignity. There was no sign of Harold. Judge Reinhardt entered, and the proceeding began with Eleanor presenting their petition for emergency guardianship. She outlined the evidence methodically, the suspicious timing of asset transfers, the false representation of Amelia as Harold's wife, the documented financial transactions suggesting exploitation. Derek's attorney countered by emphasizing Harold's diagnosed dementia, arguing that Margaret was a confused woman unable to accept that her relationship with Harold had been a product of his condition. Mrs. Simmons developed an attachment to Mr. Whittaker during his unfortunate episode of wandering, the attorney stated smoothly. She has concocted this elaborate conspiracy theory rather than accept the reality of his medical condition and family situation. Margaret felt her cheeks burn at the dismissive characterization, but maintained her composure. When called to testify, she spoke clearly about her relationship with Harold, the inconsistencies in Amelia's story, and the documentary evidence they had discovered. Your Honour, Derek's attorney interrupted, Mrs. Simmons admits to entering my client's home without permission and removing documents. This constitutes breaking and entering and theft. The home in question belonged to Harold Whittaker until 6 months ago, Eleanor countered, and Mrs. Simmons had a key given to her by Mr. Whittaker himself. No documents were removed, only photographed for evidence. The judge's expression remained neutral as she turned to Derek. Mr. Whittaker, can you explain why your father's house was transferred to your name shortly after his diagnosis? Derek shifted uncomfortably. My father wanted to ensure his property would be protected as his condition progressed. He asked me to take ownership so that decisions about the property wouldn't be complicated by his cognitive decline. And the subsequent liquidation of his assets, the cash withdrawals from his accounts. Necessary medical expenses, Derek replied smoothly. Quality care isn't cheap, Your Honour. Yet, Mr. Whittaker was placed in Sunny Pines, a basic care facility that accepts Medicare, the judge noted, reviewing the documents before her. The hearing continued for nearly 2 hours, with testimony from the neurologist about inconsistencies in Harold's competency evaluation and from Lily regarding the financial records she had uncovered. Finally, Judge Reinhardt addressed the room. This is a concerning case with significant questions about Mr. Whittaker's welfare and the management of his affairs. Before making my determination, I would like to speak with Mr. Whittaker himself. Derek's attorney stood. Your Honour, my client's father is too frail to appear in court. The stress would be detrimental to his condition. I'm not asking for a court appearance, the judge clarified. I will visit Mr. Whittaker at his residence this afternoon, accompanied by a court-appointed physician and representatives from both parties. Margaret felt a surge of hope. If the judge could see Harold's condition firsthand, speak with him in an environment where Amelia and Derek couldn't completely control the narrative. Court is adjourned until tomorrow morning, when I will deliver my ruling, Judge Reinhardt declared, gathering her papers. As they left the courtroom, Eleanor was cautiously optimistic. Home visits are a good sign. Judge Reinhardt is thorough and not easily misled. If Harold shows any recognition of the truth when she speaks with him, it will strengthen our case substantially. What if they try to move him before the visit? Margaret worried. The order explicitly forbids any change to his living situation or medical regimen, Eleanor assured her. And I've arranged for a court officer to accompany the judge. If they've fled or hidden Harold, it will only confirm our allegations. The afternoon stretched interminably as Margaret waited for news of the judge's visit. Finally, near dinner time, her phone rang. Michael, his voice tense with excitement. Mom, Eleanor just called. The judge's visit went better than we could have hoped. When she showed Harold the watch and asked about the photo inside, he clearly identified Amanda as his late wife and became agitated when Amelia tried to intercede. The court physician also observed that Harold appeared to be over-medicated and recommended an immediate medical evaluation. Margaret sank into a chair, relief washing over her. So what happens now? The judge issued an emergency order removing Harold from their care pending tomorrow's final ruling. He's being transported to Memorial Hospital for evaluation right now. Can I see him? Margaret asked, already reaching for her purse. Eleanor says yes, once he's settled. The judge specifically included you as an approved visitor. Michael paused. Mum, this is just the beginning. If the ruling goes our way, there will be a criminal investigation, financial litigation. I don't care about any of that right now, Margaret interrupted. I just want to see Harold, to make sure he's all right. 2 hours later, she stood in the doorway of a private room at Memorial Hospital. Harold lay against white pillows, looking small and fragile beneath the hospital blanket. A young nurse was adjusting his IV, speaking to him in gentle tones. "He's been asking for Margaret," the nurse said, noticing her in the doorway. "Are you her?" Margaret nodded, her throat too tight for words. "Well, he'll be happy to see you. We're working on getting all that extra medication out of his system. The doctor thinks he was being heavily sedated." Margaret approached the bed slowly. Harold's eyes were closed, his breathing even. She gently took his hand in hers, and his eyes fluttered open. "Margaret," he said, his voice scratchy but clear. "I knew you'd come back." The hospital room was quiet save for the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the occasional squeak of rubber-soled shoes in the hallway. Margaret sat beside Harold's bed, her hand resting lightly on his forearm as he slept. According to the nurses, this was the first natural, unmedicated sleep he'd had in months. Dr. Elena Patel, the neurologist Michael had arranged, entered with a tablet in hand. "Mrs. Simmons, I'm Dr. Patel. I've completed my initial assessment of Mr. Whitaker." Margaret stood, careful not to disturb Harold. "How is he?" "Considering what he's been through, remarkably resilient," Dr. Patel replied, her voice low. "The blood work confirms he was being given much higher doses of his medications than prescribed, particularly the sedatives. We're tapering him off safely." "And his condition? The dementia?" Dr. Patel's expression softened. "Mr. Whitaker does have vascular dementia, and it's progressed since his initial diagnosis. However, I believe his cognitive function was being deliberately suppressed through overmedication. As the drugs clear his system, we're already seeing improvements in his alertness and recall." "Will he recover? From the overmedication, I mean?" "Largely, yes. But the underlying condition remains. Vascular dementia doesn't reverse, though with proper care and support, progression can sometimes be slowed." Dr. Patel hesitated. "Mrs. Simmons, I should prepare you. Mr. Whitaker will have good days and difficult ones. There will be times of clarity followed by periods of confusion. It's the nature of the disease." Margaret nodded, her eyes returning to Harold's peaceful face. "I understand. I've done a lot of reading since his diagnosis. I just want him to have the best possible care and quality of life." "That attitude will make all the difference in his journey," Dr. Patel assured her. "Studies consistently show that patients with dedicated support systems fare better." A soft knock at the door announced Eleanor's arrival. The attorney looked tired but satisfied as she joined them. "Judge Reinhardt has issued her ruling," she said without preamble. "Full temporary guardianship has been granted to you, Mrs. Simmons, with Michael as alternate. The court has frozen all of Mr. Whitaker's remaining assets pending a full investigation. And," she added with grim satisfaction, "the police have arrested Derek and Amelia on charges of elder abuse, fraud, and financial exploitation." Margaret absorbed this news with mixed emotions, relief that Harold was now protected, sadness at the betrayal by his adopted son, and apprehension about the responsibility she'd just been given. "What happens next?" she asked. "A lot of legal proceedings," Eleanor admitted. "Forensic accountants will trace the missing funds. The prosecutor's office will build their criminal case, and will petition for permanent guardianship once Mr. Whitaker's condition has stabilized." "And Harold? Where will he go when he's released from the hospital?" Eleanor looked between Margaret and the sleeping man. "That's largely up to you as his guardian. There are excellent memory care facilities that would provide the professional support he needs. Or, with proper in-home assistance." "He could come home with me," Margaret finished quietly. The thought had been forming since the moment she'd seen him again. Thin and over-medicated, but still Harold. Still the man who had brought unexpected joy to her later years. "That would be a significant undertaking," Dr. Patel cautioned. "Even with professional help, being a caregiver for someone with dementia is demanding." I know, Margaret said simply. But I think it's what Harold would want. It's certainly what I want. Harold stirred, his eyes opening slowly to find Margaret beside him. There you are, he murmured, a smile spreading across his face. I was dreaming about you. Margaret returned to her chair, taking his hand in hers. Good dreams, I hope. The best kind, he replied, his voice stronger than it had been earlier. We were dancing. You were wearing blue. Eleanor quietly excused herself, followed by Dr. Patel, leaving Margaret and Harold alone. Harold, Margaret began gently, do you know where you are? He glanced around, taking in the hospital room. Not exactly where I'd choose for a date, he quipped, a flash of his old humour surfacing. Then, more seriously, hospital. Something happened with Derek and that woman. Amelia. His brow furrowed with the effort of recall. That's right, Margaret confirmed, amazed at his lucidity. They weren't taking proper care of you. The court has appointed me as your guardian for now. Harold's eyes, still sharp despite everything, held hers. My guardian angel, more like. He squeezed her hand. I remember enough, Margaret. Pieces come and go, but I remember what's important. I remember us. Tears threatened, but Margaret blinked them back. I remember too. They told me you weren't real, Harold confessed, his voice dropping. That I'd imagined our relationship during one of my episodes. But I knew better. Even when everything else got foggy, you remained clear. Over the next several days, Harold's condition improved markedly as the excess medication cleared his system. His periods of lucidity lengthened, though he still experienced confusion, particularly in the evenings. Margaret visited each day, bringing books to read aloud, music to listen to together, and photographs to help anchor his memories. On the 5th day, Dr. Patel declared him stable enough for discharge, contingent on appropriate care arrangements. I've spoken with your son, she told Margaret during their daily consultation. As a physician himself, he understands the challenges ahead. He's arranged for a hospital bed to be delivered to your home, along with other necessary equipment. A home health nurse will visit daily at first, and we've enrolled Mr. Whitaker in our outpatient memory care program. Margaret had spent the past days preparing her home, transforming her rarely used formal dining room into a bedroom for Harold, installing grab bars in the bathroom, removing throw rugs that might pose a tripping hazard. Lily had helped rearrange furniture to create clear pathways, while Michael had coordinated with medical suppliers. The morning of Harold's discharge brought nervous anticipation. Margaret chose her outfit carefully, the blue dress from their first meeting, now paired with comfortable shoes, suitable for the long day ahead. When she arrived at the hospital, she found Harold dressed and sitting in a chair by the window, his overnight bag packed beside him. Ready to go home? She asked, leaning down to kiss his cheek. Harold looked up at her with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. Home, he repeated. With you? With me, she confirmed. If that's what you want. He nodded, reaching for her hand. More than anything. The transition was not without challenges. The first night Harold woke disoriented, calling out for Amanda in the darkness. Margaret sat with him until he calmed, gently reorienting him to time and place. The second night, he insisted someone had stolen his investment files and needed to be reported to the authorities. By day, however, he showed remarkable improvement. They established routines that seemed to comfort him: morning coffee in the garden, short walks to build his strength, afternoon music sessions where Margaret discovered he still remembered how to play simple melodies on her neglected piano. The legal proceedings continued in the background of their new life together. Eleanor brought documents for Margaret's signature, updates on the recovery of Harold's assets, and news of the criminal case against Derek and Amelia. Both had been denied bail after evidence emerged that they had been planning to flee to South America with the proceeds from selling Harold's properties. They've recovered about 60% of the assets so far, Eleanor reported during one visit. The house can't be returned immediately due to the ongoing legal issues, but the court has ordered it preserved as part of the estate. Margaret found she cared little about the financial aspects, focused instead on Harold's daily progress. Each small victory, a memory recalled clearly, a task accomplished independently, a moment of genuine laughter, meant more than all the investment portfolios and property deeds combined. 6 weeks after Harold came to live with her, Margaret arranged a small gathering in her garden. Michael and his wife, Lily, and her partner, and a few close friends joined them for an informal lunch beneath the arbour where Margaret had once planned to exchange wedding vows. Harold, having one of his good days, charmed everyone with stories from his investment career, occasionally pausing to find a word but never losing the thread of his narrative. After the meal, as their guests chatted over coffee, he drew Margaret aside. "I have something to ask you," he said, his expression serious. "What is it?" she asked, concerned by his intensity. Harold took both her hands in his. "I know I'm not the man I was when we first met. And I know there are legal complications now, with guardianships and courts and all that business." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "But I wondered if you might consider a commitment ceremony. Not legally binding, perhaps, but meaningful to us." Margaret felt her heart expand with tenderness. "Are you proposing to me, Harold Whittaker?" A smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. "I believe I am, for the second time. Though I hope this attempt works out better than the last." She laughed softly, tears gathering despite her joy. "I would be honoured. But are you sure? On your difficult days?" "On my difficult days, I may not remember the ceremony," he acknowledged. "But I will always remember loving you, Margaret. That seems to be written somewhere deeper than memory, somewhere even this condition can't touch." And so, on a perfect autumn afternoon 2 months later, Margaret and Harold stood beneath the same arbour where they'd almost been married before. This time there was no white dress, no formal suits, no legal documents to sign. Instead, they wore comfortable clothes in shades of blue, surrounded by a handful of people who loved them. Reverend Matthews, who had been understanding about the unusual circumstances, led them through simple vows, promises not of forever, which they knew better than to expect now, but of present love, care, and commitment for whatever time remained to them. "I've been blessed twice in this life," Harold said, his voice clear and strong in one of his moments of perfect lucidity. "To find love once is fortunate. To find it again, at my age and in my condition, is nothing short of miraculous. Margaret, I may not always remember the details of our days together, but I will always recognize the feeling of being with you. That is my promise." Margaret, holding his trembling hands in hers, replied, "Harold, I choose you as you are now, as you will be tomorrow, and as you will be on the days when neither of us recognizes the path ahead. I promise patience on the difficult days, joy in the good moments, and unwavering love through it all." They exchanged simple silver bands, not wedding rings in the legal sense, but symbols of their commitment nonetheless. As the small gathering applauded, Harold leaned down to whisper in Margaret's ear, "Dance with me?" Michael started the music, the same waltz that had played during their first dance class meeting. Harold led Margaret in a slow circle, his steps uncertain at times but his arms steady around her. "This feels familiar," he murmured, a brief shadow of confusion crossing his face. "It should," she replied gently. "This is where we began." Recognition returned to his eyes. "The community centre. You were wearing blue." "Just like today," she confirmed, smiling up at him. That evening, after their guests had departed, they sat together on Margaret's porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Harold's head rested against her shoulder, his breathing slow and content. "Happy?" she asked softly. He was quiet so long that she thought he might have drifted to sleep. Then he stirred, lifting his face to hers. "I don't remember what we did today," he admitted, a hint of distress in his voice. "There was music, I think, and people." Our commitment ceremony, Margaret supplied gently. We exchanged rings. She lifted their joined hands where the silver bands caught the fading light. Harold studied the rings with interest, then looked back at her with a smile that melted away the momentary confusion. I may not remember the ceremony, he said, unconsciously echoing his words from weeks earlier. But I know I love you, Margaret. That much I'm certain of. She leaned forward to kiss him softly. That's all that matters, then. As darkness fell around them, they remained on the swing, two silver-haired figures holding hands like teenagers. Harold might not remember tomorrow what they had celebrated today. He might wake confused, calling for a wife long gone, or believing himself in a different time and place entirely. But in this moment, as in many others that would follow, he knew exactly where he belonged, beside the woman who had found him when he was lost, fought for him when he couldn't fight for himself, and loved him precisely as he was, memory lapses and all. For Margaret it was enough, more than enough. It was, in fact, everything she had never expected to find again in her later years, a partner for the journey ahead, however winding and uncertain that path might be. They would face it together.